Hello, and welcome to this really historical deep dive with Peter Homberg. I'm honest with you. I never thought that we're talking about this German Cannabis Gesetz, CanG. And when Peter and me started really this journey 3 years ago to cover highly relevant regulative topics within 20 minutes. And I even think that we just started our journey and we're going to see some ripple effects all across Europe. Like always, a few words about Peter, who's always taking time. I really appreciate that monthly to giving us all this overview. He's a partner and the head of the German Life Science Practices and the European Cannabis Group at Dentons. Peter, the stage is yours, and please let us all know what happened yesterday when the law got signed.
Yeah, Falk, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And indeed, this is a kind of a historical step here in Germany and in Europe, because the legalization of recreational cannabis in Germany has taken place. And I need to share my screen, Falk, so if you could be so kind and let me do that.
You're good to go.
Okay, here we go. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And if you can see that, please let me know.
Yes.
Okay, so indeed, the law regarding the at least partial legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes will come into force on April 1st. I would like to discuss with you a little bit about what has happened, where were the obstacles, and what can we expect from the new CanG, as we call it, the new Cannabis Gesetz, which is regulating the various issues surrounding the legalization of the recreational cannabis here in Germany. I would like also to look into some implementation issues. What can the so-called Cannabis Cultivation Association expect? What is the timeline? How can we actually expect cannabis to be ready for consumption by the members of the cannabis cultivation associations? So look into what has happened so far. I think I've used that chart already for many deep dive sessions. As you can see, back in December 2021, the new federal government actually decided to legalize cannabis for recreational purposes. The first big step forward was nearly a year later, in October 22, when the real legalization or the first key point paper of the real legalization to a full extent, very much comparable to Canada, has actually been published. Then the government had talks with the EU Commission, and from there, which talks were actually described as being productive, which seems to be a little bit overstating. The government took its path to legalize cannabis in Germany with the new CanG. And on March 22nd, only a few days ago, the Bundesrat actually endorsed the Cannabis Act, which was before resolved by the Bundestag, by the parliament. And there were lots of discussions before the meeting on March 22, whether the Bundesrat actually should refer the draft law to the mediation committee in order to implement further amendments. What happened just one day before is that the BMG, the Ministry of Health, through Karl Lauterbach, our Minister of Health, actually provided a so-called protocol statement in which he assured the members of the Bundesrat that there will be some changes if the law will come into force. This obviously seemed to convince all those representatives of the federal states in the Bundesrat to really not to decide to leave the respective law going through the Bundesrat and not referred to the mediation committee. So that is a real back step forward. What is actually missing on that chart here is that the law has been executed by the president, which is the last step of a law in Germany to come into force. And with effect of April 1st, we will have the legalization, the partial legalization of recreational cannabis in Germany happening. So what does that really mean? Well, there are lots of different issues. I just would like to refer to a few of them. First of all, adults can actually possess up to 50 grams of dried flowers in their private spaces, always provided that is, of course, secured against any kind of misuse by minors or whoever should not have access to the flowers. In public spaces, the maximum limit which you can carry with you are 25 grams. These are significant amounts, frankly speaking, and in other European countries who are doing kind of a legalization of cannabis for recreational purpose right now, the limit is significantly lower, in particular in the Netherlands. But the German government decided that this is the limit. So here we are. The cannabis can be obtained and consumed from personal cultivation, which means home grow. So each and every adult in a household can actually grow up to 3 female plants and can actually then consume the harvested cannabis from those 3 plants. That is also one of the reasons why actually last minute the possession of cannabis in the private spaces was increased to 50 grams, because we all know that 3 female plants, if you grow them correctly, produce significantly amounts, more amounts than 50 grams. What is also important is that there will be the possibility of a so-called joint cultivation in cultivation associations. The cultivation associations are called also cannabis clubs, which is kind of misleading because these are not real clubs as we know them from Spain. These are rather associations for cultivation. They call them cultivation associations, and as such, they can actually, for up to 500 members, grow cannabis in their premises. And I come back to that in a minute. What is important is where do actually the home growers and the respective cultivation associations get their growing material from. So the cannabis seeds are, of course, important, but they can be actually obtained from seeds or from companies specialized on seeds in the respective EU member states. But it's very important, and that's also applicable, of course, for the cultivation associations. Seeds, plants, and the harvested marijuana must be protected against theft and access by children. So we have to have lockable cabinets and rooms. So the cannabis, as I said, can be also obtained and consumed from cultivation associations. They are non-commercial, and they will be allowed to commence their activities from July 1st onwards. So what is important to understand that home grow can be easily started. So that's why everybody is looking forward to actually ordering seeds for the home growing from other EU member states. What is more difficult is that to establish kind of a legal framework for the cannabis associations in order to let them know to whom should they apply to get a license for growing. What kind of security measurements do they have to take? I come back to that in a minute. There is a little bit, this is kind of a framework in this cannabis Gesetz. But also, what are the measurements in order to secure the spaces? What are the possibilities? Can I actually ask somebody to take care of the cultivation? Can I actually employ a master grower? Or how can I actually do that? And this is all subject to further rules and regulations, which will, of course, be established within the next, hopefully next couple of weeks, because July 1st is coming quickly. What is very important, of course, also is the exception here for the medical cannabis industry. The procedure to start medical or cultivation for medical cannabis will be significantly different. We had this tender procedure for the domestic cultivation of cannabis in the past. As we all know, 3 companies have actually obtained these licenses from the BfArM, from the Cannabis Agency. But in the future, actually all interested parties who are fulfilling, of course, certain requirements, which we don't know yet what they are, but this will also be definitely coming into place very shortly, can apply for a license for domestic cultivation of medical cannabis here in Germany. As I said, the whole procedure, how, when, and in which way I should actually apply as an interested grower to the BfArM, to the Cannabis Agency to obtain the license is not yet set. So there is a whole legal framework for this part of the CanG also missing, though there's lots of work to do right now. And we are expecting, of course, that the BfArM is reacting relatively quickly, because end of this year, the 4 years actually, with respect, if I'm not mistaken, the respective licenses will come to an end. So we will now see what are the preconditions for cultivation of medical cannabis here in Germany in the future. So what is important to say here, and I'm now looking into the implementation of the CanG, is that the cultivation associations are organized as registered non-profit associations or cooperatives. The club is only permitted to hand over to its members a certain amount of cannabis. So you will, of course, now ask, how can they do that? How do they can they financing themselves? What are their sources in order to get the financing? So the idea of the CanG is that the members of, as I said, up to 500 members of the cultivations associations are financially supporting the cultivation here by either entrance fees to the club, by monthly fees or annual fees to be paid to the club as a member, or membership fees, and of course also an amount which they are going to pay to the club for receiving cannabis flowers from the club. It should be mentioned that the adults here, which are 21 and above, can actually obtain 50 grams per month from the club. And those between 18 and 21 can only obtain 30 grams from the respective cannabis associations. And the THC percentage of those plants, of those flowers, is limited to 10%. So you will, of course, ask, how can they find out? There will be a need for lots of laboratory analysis here in order to really hand over the respective right plants to the right persons. The clubs are inspected by the competent authorities at least once a year. Again, here, we don't know yet who are the competent authorities. Though the whole legal framework is missing here, but we will definitely get to know that in due course, because the federal states are now asked to really set up the respective infrastructure and the legal framework. What is important, only club members can obtain the cannabis grown in the club. The associations are not allowed to sell or give away its products to any persons outside of the association. And only one membership in one cultivation association is permitted. And it must be an active participation in the cultivation, which means the passive membership, which is aiming to only acquire cannabis, is something which is not permitted under the new CanG, which is an interesting issue. We will see how the members are actually then working together, cultivating in those cannabis cultivation associations the plants. And what is important to know, advertising and sponsorship for cultivation associations and social clubs or cannabis are strictly prohibited. So what are the requirements for the granting of a permit? Well, that is to a certain extent, as I said, still uncertain. So what we actually definitely know at this point in time is that there are certain legal requirements in order to which have to be met in order to get the license. So persons authorized to represent the cultivation associations have an unlimited legal capacity, which they have to prove. Of course, they should not be convicted for any kind of illegal drug possession before. I think that's one of those issues here, which you have to take into consideration. The Cannabis Cultivation Association has to guarantee that the cannabis seeds and cuttings in its property are adequately protected against access by children and unauthorized third parties, which means in particular non-members. Of course, the cultivation associations have to ensure compliance with all the provisions of the CanG, and the application, and that's what we know, has to be submitted in writing or electronically to the competent state authority, which is not yet defined. I think what is important also to mention are the locations. There was in the first draft of the CanG provisions where it was really uncertain, can actually the so-called pacified property be away from, which means the greenhouse or the respective building, can it be somewhere else in a different area in comparison to the seat, the office, I would say, of the respective club? Yes, that is possible. So in order to allow also clubs to be operative in larger cities where in the city you won't find sufficient space in order to really cultivate cannabis, you can have actually an office like here in Berlin Mitte, and of course the respective cultivation can be in some of the outside areas of Berlin. I think that is important to know. Also, the respective explanatory memorandum to Section 11 of the so-called CanG states that in addition to the purchase, rent, and lease, it's also possible to own a specific pacified property by the respective growers association. The import of cannabis seeds from EU member states for non-commercial cultivation of cannabis and cultivation associations is permitted. So they can actually purchase their seeds and, of course, all the equipment which they need from third parties. Section 4, paragraph 3 of the CanG permits the purchase of cannabis seeds by adults within the European Union for the purpose of private home cultivation, which I already mentioned. So what is important is that there are no legal hurdles here, in particular not from the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs dated 1961, with regard to the transfer, sale, and other means of exploitation of the seeds. So we are actually fine. However, what is not allowed, that you can actually buy these seeds from outside of the EU. There is the Council Directive 2002/57 in place of 13th of June 2002, where it is which doesn't speak against the respective movement of seeds within the European Union, but it can actually only be used for commercial cultivation. In contrast to the scope of application of the aforementioned directive, the CanG regulates the private and communal non-commercial cultivation of cannabis and thus allows what is necessary in order to really transfer seeds around within the European Union. What we have to look at also is that the cultivation associations may not ship, deliver, or arrange for the delivery by means of courier services, etc. It has to be really handed over at the dispensary side of the cannabis association to the member, by a member to a member. And of course, it has to be properly documented. Transportation is allowed, of course, between the growing area of the club and the seed. This transportation is subject to certain conditions, which you can see here. Relatively complicated. I'm very much interested how this will work in practice. However, as I said, the dispatch and delivery of cannabis seeds to members of the growers is permitted, not of the flowers. What is important also is that educational evidence-based information has to be provided, in particular with regard to health-related damages caused by cannabis if used under the age of 25. The permit to cultivate is actually limited for a certain period of time, and of course to a fixed annual quantity. The annual quantity refers very much to the needs of the members. So of course the size of the membership is important for getting the respective quantities licensed, which I can actually do and cultivate in a cultivation association. What is also important is that if there are some whatever violations of the respective rules and regulations, which we do not yet know in detail, the permit can be revoked. And that is something which would be, of course, awkward. Should the demand of the members for personal consumption change, the permit can be adjusted. That is already stipulated in the respective laws. So documentation is important, and of course there are obligations to report. So the cultivation associations must document from whom they have received the growing material, and of course how much they have harvested. Of course, also with respect to the THC content. Of course, as I said, the different aged members get different THC contents. So this has to be taken into consideration as well. And of course, there are reporting obligations with regard to the quantities transferred to the members, of course, on an annualized basis, whereby, of course, the members have to really register with the clubs with name and address, etc., in order to become a member of the cultivation association. So last but not least, the cultivation association must inform the authorities immediately if they discover any kind of contamination or polluted cannabis or cannabis from the black market in their stock, if that has been actually been noticed. So you see, there are lots of different rules and regulations or stipulations in place through the CanG. But we will, of course, have to expect further and more detailed rules and regulations by the federal states in order to regulate the respective cultivation associations and how they should operate. Having said that, thank you very much for your attention. I would like to give back to Falk. Falk, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was quite a run.